27 years on the bench. Now, following the court's sweeping ruling on abortion, overturning Roe v. Wade, and after striking down New York State's gun control law about carrying concealed weapons, the court now handing down consequential decisions on both immigration and climate change impacting the entire country. On immigration, there's a key question that we're looking at here. Did President Biden unlawfully terminate the Trump administration's so-called Remain in Mexico policy? Now, the answer to that question turned out to be no, meaning the Biden administration can go ahead and move forward in ending that policy. But of course, it's sure to have a profound impact on immigration. Now, the second question here, climate change, a significant decision on how the EPA is allowed to enforce restrictions to protect the environment. And the question we're looking at, can the EPA issue rules capable of reshaping the nation's electricity grids, driving power companies away from fossil fuels? The answer there, technically no, although it's not a complete elimination of its power. It's just reducing what the EPA can actually do when it comes to things like climate change. Of course, profound implications, when it comes to other agencies as well. So let's get right to ABC's senior national correspondent, Terry Moran, who covers the Supreme Court for us. Terry. And Terry, big picture here on both issues. What is the impact across the board?
Two big cases here, really big cases, and President Biden's authority at stake in each one. He won one, he lost one. The win on immigration, as you just said, the Remain in Mexico policy that former President Trump had established, that President Biden had tried to remove. The court finds that the president does have the authority to end the Remain in Mexico policy if he chooses. The states of Texas and Missouri had sued the government, trying to make sure that that policy remained in effect. But the court says that the law gives the president discretion to do that, and that the Constitution reserves foreign policy questions like, will we have negotiations with the nation of Mexico about all the migrants who have to remain there? That is the province of the president. So that's a big win for President Biden. On the law side, that's climate change. And in that case, the court, in both opinions, by the way, by Chief Justice John Roberts, the court sharply limited the ability, the authority of the government, the EPA, to limit climate greenhouse gas emissions. And they did so because they said that question, as it was addressed in the Obama administration, which set up a cap and trade policy trying to limit climate change emissions, that is the kind of question that is so large, affects so much of the American economy, that it requires Congress to address it and not an agency of the executive branch. And that not only will affect climate change in a major way, but it will also have ripple effects right through the federal government, because this is a landmark opinion saying, reviving the notion that on big questions of national policy, the national legislature, Congress, must make the law and the agencies execute it.
All right, Terry, we'll come back to you in just a bit, but let's drill down on immigration here and bring in ABC's Kate Shaw, legal analyst and ABC News contributor. And Kate, I guess the question here is, what was it that the Supreme Court really took a look at that went with the Biden administration and said, you know what, it's okay for you to end this Trump-era policy?
Well, remember when Biden first took office, he moved very quickly to end this policy, first announcing that he would do it and then formally rolling it back through an agency process. And yet he has been stymied in actually implementing that termination by lower federal courts that basically said, no, you can't. You must continue this Trump-era policy. So that was pretty extraordinary, actually, that the lower court said, even though this is a major immigration policy question with humanitarian and foreign policy and foreign relations dimensions, the lower federal courts are preventing the president from implementing his policy judgment. And what the Supreme Court said today was, that's not for the lower courts to say. That's actually not really for the courts to say at all. The president has acted within statutory boundaries and so may terminate this policy. So really important for the implementation of the Biden immigration policy agenda, which again has been basically on hold, at least this part of it, and also for presidential authority more broadly. There's a Kavanaugh concurrence that says nothing suggests that Congress intended federal courts to make these kinds of decisions for the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States.
So let's bring in ABC's chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega. Cecilia, you've been traveling with the president in Madrid right now. How does the administration move forward now that they have this win?
Well, I think they will certainly file this in the win category, Whit, because they have hit a number of roadblocks in court. You'll remember President Biden, of course, particularly when it came to immigration, campaigned on trying to overturn and undo so many of former President Trump's immigration policies. And this one was certainly at the top of the list. He had campaigned on this more humane approach to immigration. But I think it's really important that we spell out for our viewers what this policy did and why the administration wanted to undo it. Immigration rights activists in the White House said that sending people who were trying to come into this country to legally claim an asylum, make it a legal asylum claim, that they had to go back to home countries or go back to other countries, some of the most dangerous places in the world, and wait until their cases can be heard by an immigration judge. And they said that when they were back in these home countries, they faced horrific violence. We're talking about sexual assault and torture. And they are coming from some of the most dangerous places in the world, in Central America and Honduras, fleeing horrible gang violence and environmental problems. And so this administration really said that this should not be the case. They should not face this danger when they go back across the country, which is why they wanted to undo this policy. Look, Whit, it's also important that we talk about the timing in which this is happening right now. That horrific case in terms of all of those migrants, 50+ migrants killed inside that truck there in San Antonio just the other day. 68 migrants caught at the border trying to cross, 58 of them children. We are talking about a time when the Border Patrol and border agents are on pace to see a record number of people crossing this year, on pace to beat last year's record. This is certainly immigration shaping up to be a major issue in the upcoming midterms. So the timing of this extremely important, but the Biden administration will very much see this as allowing them to sort of move on and get down to some of that business of undoing some of former President Trump's immigration policy. Whit.
Yeah, that human smuggling incident in San Antonio, among the worst ever seen in this country in history. So obviously still an issue. We know that there have been caravans as well of migrants working their way towards the border. So a lot of questions out there. Let's bring in ABC News contributor Maria Elena Salinas. And Maria Elena, from a practical standpoint, what does this mean right now for asylum seekers who are trying to get to the U.S.?
It's definitely with relief for the thousands of people that have been waiting, some for months, some for years. You know, the Remain in Mexico policy has been controversial from the start. As Cecilia was mentioning, it's deemed inhumane. It forced thousands of people to set up makeshift camps in border cities in unsanitary and really dangerous conditions. Border towns in Mexico are among the most dangerous in the country with the presence of criminal gangs. And many become so desperate waiting that they risk crossing illegally, and the consequences could be tragic, as we saw with the deaths of the 53 migrants in San Antonio. They fall prey to unscrupulous human traffickers. So lifting this policy actually will save lives. The Remain in Mexico policy affects mostly people who have applied for asylum, and they're waiting for their case to be considered, not to be confused with Title 42 that still allows the government to immediately remove anyone who attempts to cross the border without processing them. And right now there's approximately 5,000 asylum seekers in Mexico. And now the Biden administration will have that opportunity to assess them. You know, I was with a team of ABC staff at the border just a few weeks ago, and we were informed that there are many asylum seekers that are already being allowed into the country under a humanitarian parole, mostly families with small children, elderly, and people with health problems, people that are considered vulnerable. They're taken to shelters and eventually released to family members. So this is definitely going to be a big relief for many of these families who have already suffered in their home country.
Yeah, we've seen record. Oh, forgive me. Go ahead.
Yes, and now they will have an opportunity to present their case. We have to remember, they present their case. If their case is deemed credible, then they get into the process. If not, they will be held and then again deported. Have that opportunity, and they do have the legal right to request asylum, and the U.S. has the legal responsibility to listen to their cases.
Maria Elena Salinas, thank you again. We do appreciate it. We want to drill down now on that other issue. That's the court ruling on climate change, and this a loss for the Biden administration that had a number of bold efforts that they were trying to reach over the next 10 to 20 years when it comes to climate change. Let's bring in ABC's Devin Dwyer, who also covers the Supreme Court for us. And Devin, as we noted there, the Biden administration is really going to have to take a second look at how they're going to approach their climate agenda from here on out.
Yeah, Whit, the Supreme Court has long said that the EPA can regulate greenhouse gases, which are causing climate change. But today, they handcuffed the agency in terms of how aggressively it can go after those greenhouse gases. And make no mistake, this is devastating to climate advocates, especially the Biden administration, who had made the climate agenda a centerpiece of this White House. They want to roll back emissions in this country, a leading driver of global climate change. And this is a huge win, Whit, for the coal industry and those communities that support it. I spent a lot of time ahead of this case in Appalachia, coincidentally one of the communities hardest hit by the impacts of climate change, but they're very resistant to these sorts of regulations. 1.7 million jobs in that industry and related industries. And even though they are open to regulation, they want some regulation to cap emissions at these power plants. That brings in jobs as well. There was real concern that generation shifting, requiring these companies to move towards solar and wind, was really a bridge too far. And we saw the court today agree with that, Whit.
All right, Devin, thanks. Let's bring in ABC's Kate Shaw, once again, our legal analyst and ABC News contributor. And one of the things that we've been hearing about as it relates to climate change in the Supreme Court here is this major questions rule here, which basically says Congress must speak clearly if it's going to give broad powers to a specific agency. So beyond climate change and the EPA and what the EPA can and can't do now, what are the broader impacts here?
Well, Whit, this doctrine is not something that is written explicitly into the Constitution. It's a doctrine the court really started talking about in the 1980s, but you described it accurately. It's just basically the idea that Congress has to speak in really, really precise ways if it wants to give agencies the authority to act. And lots of statutes are broadly written. The part of the Clean Air Act that the EPA was relying on to issue this rule is written pretty broadly by design. And yet the court here says, no, that's not good enough to give EPA the authority it claims. And the logic absolutely could apply outside of the EPA. Actually, the court used similar reasoning to strike down several COVID policies, the CDC eviction moratorium and the OSHA test or vaccine mandate, both COVID approaches that the Supreme Court struck down on similar theories. So I think you see what Justice Elena Kagan said in her dissent is this is the court assuming for itself the power to make really consequential decisions, taking it from agencies, even taking it from Congress. And so the topic here is climate regulation. But I think the logic applies to all manner of questions and problems that government might try to address. And the court is here saying, we're going to second guess your ability to do that.
Let's bring in ABC's chief meteorologist, Ginger Zee. And Ginger, I know we were just looking over the Biden climate agenda, just among those things, cutting U.S. emissions by 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. And then it goes on by 2050 to have a net zero economy. How do scientists approach this now?
Those were already incredibly difficult goals to attain. And where we're at right now, as we see every year, almost like it's expected, we have just again in May hit our highest levels of CO2 on record since humans have been on this earth. And we did it millions of years ago on Earth itself, but we know that CO2 primarily, but greenhouse gas emissions are what is causing the rapid rise in temperatures on our planet, and then all of the issues that come after that. CO2 pollution here in the United States is driven by many things, but number one is transportation. A close second, power plants. So power plants are creating greenhouse gas emissions, that's CO2, and scientists will tell you we've got to make change yesterday, away from fossil fuel and toward renewable energy if we want to curb those numbers when it comes to the warming of our planet. What the outcome today means, not just for the EPA, but for the world, that this is going to make it way more difficult. We have seen 12% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions since 2005 here in the United States. That's without regulation. But that's just not fast enough, is what they're saying. So to meet the Paris Agreement, to meet those Biden administration goals, like reaching 100% carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035 or achieving net zero economy by 2050, I think this not only makes it more difficult, but remember, when you put this on Congress, that takes time. And time, Whit, is not on our side when it comes to climate change.
And as you noted, it's not just the agenda here in the United States, but our commitment to our allies around the world and what they were trying to do with the Paris Agreement. Ginger Zee Forrest, thank you so much. Let's bring back ABC senior national correspondent Terry Moran. And I'll let you speak on immigration in just a moment, but just back to climate change for a second. If the EPA can't regulate climate emissions and this now has to go back to Congress, many people might just be looking at this as more opportunity for gridlock.
That's it exactly, Whit. What we have is a broken Congress on immigration and on climate change. For the most of this century, Congress has been trying to act to find a solution to the immigration issues in this country, to try to act on climate change. And it is such a divided Congress and such a dysfunctional Congress that it cannot make the kind of law that would direct the agency to operate in such a way. And so President Obama, President Trump, President Biden have all now taken upon themselves with their executive authority to try to do something. And the court is saying on both these issues, slow down. No, the Congress needs to act. Now, I do think one of the things we're seeing is this is a court in the throes of change, an emboldened conservative supermajority now really striking out and looking for areas that it can make a huge difference. And on the climate change case, it really does, as Kate said, impact not just the authority of the EPA, but the ripple effects on other executive branch agencies to try to be creative in addressing problems that Congress is failing to address has been limited by this opinion.
Terry, thank you. Let's bring back Cecilia Vega, again, traveling with the president in Madrid. And Cecilia, I want to shift gears a little bit here because we mentioned Roe v. Wade earlier, and the president was asked about that and made news today talking about the filibuster.
Yeah, Whit, we're here at an international summit of leaders from around the world, but it really was these issues back home that dominated the headlines out of this press conference that just wrapped a few minutes ago. So look, the president has been saying, and he used some pretty harsh terms right now, calling the court, saying that it has been engaged in outrageous behavior. He does say he plans to meet with state governors tomorrow, saying that he will have some executive actions to announce because so many Democrats and progressives back in Washington have been pushing on him for what they say is a lack of urgency, wanting this White House to do more. We have been saying, though, they are very limited in terms of his executive actions that they can do. So here we are at this point. The White House, the president today said the most important action that can happen right now is for Congress to codify the protections in Roe. Basically, that means that they would pass abortion rights protections at the federal level. But the Democrats don't have the 60 votes at this point that they need to get there. So we have heard this shift today from President Biden saying that he would now support a change in the Senate rules so that the Democrats have a simple majority. They don't need to get to 60 in order to change those Senate rules. This is something President Biden has been hesitant to support in the past. But the reality check on all this right now, Whit, it is unclear if he's got the votes, even in his own party, to get there to change these Senate rules. So it seems we could be back at square one when it comes to Washington and the infighting there, even though, Whit, today the president is saying this issue of abortion rights protections back in our country remains today an issue of life or death.
And again, when it comes to the filibuster, if they make a change there and Republicans regain power in future elections, then there's the possibility they just go and reverse what was done before. All right, Cecilia, thank you so much, and to our entire team on a variety of major issues today. We are also less than 90 minutes away from another historic moment in America. Justice Stephen Breyer stepping down at noon today. In his final act at the Supreme Court, he will deliver the judicial oath to his successor, his beloved former law clerk, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is about to become the first black woman in America to serve as a Supreme Court justice. We will be right back here live at noon for the ceremony. Until then, our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. You can get breaking coverage on the ABC News app. And then the entire team will be back here for World News Tonight. For now, I'm Wade Johnson in New York. Have a great day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.